80th Congress of the United States of America, at the first session, begun and held at the City of Washington on Friday, the 3rd day of January, 1947. An act to promote the national security by providing for a Secretary of Defense, for a national military establishment, for a Department of the Army, a Department of the Navy, and a Department of the Air Force, and for the coordination of the activities of the national military establishment with other departments and agencies of the government concerned with the national security. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that this act may be cited as the National Security Act of 1947. Declaration of Policy. Section 2. In enacting this legislation, it is the intent of Congress to provide a comprehensive program for the future security of the United States, to provide for the establishment of integrated policies and procedures for the departments, agencies, and functions of the government relating to the national security, to provide 3 military departments for the operation and administration of the Army, the Navy, including Naval Aviation and the United States Marine Corps, and the Air Force, with their assigned combat and service components, to provide for their authoritative coordination and unified direction under civilian control, but not to merge them, to provide for the effective strategic direction of the armed forces, and for their operation under unified control, and for their integration into an efficient team of land, naval, and air forces. Title I. Coordination for National Security. National Security Council. Section 101. A. There is hereby established a council to be known as the National Security Council, hereinafter in this section referred to as the Council. The President of the United States shall preside over meetings of the Council, provided that in his absence he may designate a member of the Council to preside in his place. The function of the Council shall be to advise the President with respect to the integration of domestic, foreign, and military policies relating to the national security so as to enable the military services and the other departments and agencies of the government to cooperate more effectively in matters involving the national security. The Council shall be composed of the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, appointed under Section 202, the Secretary of the Army, referred to in Section 205, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Air Force, appointed under Section 207, the Chairman of the National Security Resources Board, appointed under Section 103, and such of the following named officers as the President may designate from time to time: the Secretaries of the Executive Departments, the Chairman of the Munitions Board, appointed under Section 213, and the Chairman of the Research and Development Board, appointed under Section 214. But no such additional member shall be designated until the advice and consent of the Senate has been given to his appointment to the office, the holding of which authorizes his designation as a member of the Council. B. In addition to performing such other functions as the President may direct, for the purpose of more effectively coordinating the policies and functions of the departments and agencies of the government relating to the national security, it shall, subject to the direction of the President, be the duty of the Council: 1. To assess and appraise the objectives, commitments, and risks of the United States in relation to our actual and potential military power, in the interest of national security, for the purpose of making recommendations to the President in connection therewith, and 2. To consider policies on matters of common interest to the departments and agencies of the government concerned with the national security, and to make recommendations to the President in connection therewith. C. The Council shall have a staff to be headed by a civilian executive secretary who shall be appointed by the President and who shall receive compensation at the rate of $10,000 a year. The executive secretary, subject to the direction of the Council, is hereby authorized, subject to the Civil Service Laws and the Classification Act of 1923, as amended, to appoint and fix the compensation of such personnel as may be necessary to perform such duties as may be prescribed by the Council in connection with the performance of its functions. D. The Council shall, from time to time, make such recommendations and such other reports to the President as it deems appropriate or as the President may require. Central Intelligence Agency. Section 102A. There is hereby established under the National Security Council a Central Intelligence Agency with a Director of Central Intelligence, who shall be the head thereof. The Director shall be appointed by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, from among the commissioned officers of the armed services or from among individuals in civilian life. The Director shall receive compensation at the rate of $14,000 a year. B. 1. If a commissioned officer of the armed services is appointed as Director, then A. In the performance of his duties as Director, he shall be subject to no supervision, control, restriction, or prohibition, military or otherwise, other than would be operative with respect to him if he were a civilian in no way connected with the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, the Department of the Air Force, or the Armed Services or any component thereof. And B. He shall not possess or exercise any supervision, control, powers, or functions other than such as he possesses or is authorized or directed to exercise as Director with respect to the armed services or any component thereof, the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, or the Department of the Air Force, or any branch, bureau, unit, or division thereof, or with respect to any of the personnel, military or civilian, of any of the foregoing. 2. Except as provided in paragraph 1, the appointment to the office of Director of a commissioned officer of the armed services and his acceptance of and service in such office shall in no way affect any status, office, rank, or grade he may occupy or hold in the armed services, or any emolument, perquisite, right, privilege, or benefit incident to or arising out of any such status, office, rank, or grade. Any such commissioned officer shall, while serving in the office of Director, receive the military pay and allowances, active or retired, as the case may be, payable to a commissioned officer of his grade and length of service, and shall be paid, from any funds available to defray the expenses of the agency, annual compensation at a rate equal to the amount by which $14,000 exceeds the amount of his annual military pay and allowances. C. Notwithstanding the provisions of Section 6 of the Act of August 24, 1912, 37 Statute 555, or the provisions of any other law, the Director of Central Intelligence may, in his discretion, terminate the employment of any officer or employee of the agency whenever he shall deem such termination necessary or advisable in the interests of the United States. But such termination shall not affect the right of such officer or employee to seek or accept employment in any other department or agency of the government if declared eligible for such employment by the United States Civil Service Commission. D. For the purpose of coordinating the intelligence activities of the several government departments and agencies in the interest of national security, it shall be the duty of the agency, under the direction of the National Security Council, 1. To advise the National Security Council in matters concerning such intelligence activities of the government departments and agencies as relate to national security. 2. To make recommendations to the National Security Council for the coordination of such intelligence activities of the departments and agencies of the government as relate to the national security. 3. To correlate and evaluate intelligence relating to the national security, and provide for the appropriate dissemination of such intelligence within the government using where appropriate existing agencies and facilities, provided that the agency shall have no police, subpoena, law enforcement powers, or internal security functions, provided further that the departments and other agencies of the government shall continue to collect, evaluate, correlate, and disseminate departmental intelligence, and provided further that the Director of Central Intelligence shall be responsible for protecting intelligence sources and methods from unauthorized disclosure. 4. To perform, for the benefit of the existing intelligence agencies, such additional services of common concern as the National Security Council determines can be more efficiently accomplished centrally. 5. To perform such other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the National Security Council may from time to time direct. E. To the extent recommended by the National Security Council and approved by the President, such intelligence of the departments and agencies of the government, except as hereinafter provided, relating to the national security, shall be open to the inspection of the Director of Central Intelligence, and such intelligence as relates to the national security and is possessed by such departments and other agencies of the government, except as hereinafter provided, shall be made available to the Director of Central Intelligence for correlation, evaluation, and dissemination. Provided, however, that upon the written request of the Director of Central Intelligence, the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation shall make available to the Director of Central Intelligence such information for correlation, evaluation, and dissemination as may be essential to the national security. F. Effective when the Director first appointed under subsection A has taken office, 1. The National Intelligence Authority, 11 Federal Regulation 1337, 1339, February 5, 1946, shall cease to exist, and 2. The personnel, property, and records of the Central Intelligence Group are transferred to the Central Intelligence Agency, and such group shall cease to exist. Any unexpended balances of appropriations, allocations, or other funds available or authorized to be made available for such group shall be available and shall be authorized to be made available in like manner for expenditure by the agency. National Security Resources Board. Section 103. A. There is hereby established a National Security Resources Board, hereinafter in this section referred to as the Board, to be composed of the Chairman of the Board and such heads or representatives of the various executive departments and independent agencies as may from time to time be designated by the President to be members of the Board. The Chairman of the Board shall be appointed from civilian life by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, and shall receive compensation at the rate of $14,000 a year. B. The Chairman of the Board, subject to the direction of the President, is authorized, subject to the Civil Service Laws and the Classification Act of 1923, as amended, to appoint and fix the compensation of such personnel as may be necessary to assist the Board in carrying out its functions. C. It shall be the function of the Board to advise the President concerning the coordination of military, industrial, and civilian mobilization, including 1. Policies concerning industrial and civilian mobilization in order to assure the most effective mobilization and maximum utilization of the nation's manpower in the event of war. 2. Programs for the effective use in time of war of the nation's natural and industrial resources for military and civilian needs, for the maintenance and stabilization of the civilian economy in time of war, and for the adjustment of such economy to war needs and conditions. 3. Policies for unifying, in time of war, the activities of federal agencies and departments engaged in or concerned with production, procurement, distribution, or transportation of military or civilian supplies, materials, and products. 4. The relationship between potential supplies of and potential requirements for manpower, resources, and productive facilities in time of war. 5. Policies for establishing adequate reserves of strategic and critical material, and for the conservation of these reserves. 6. The strategic relocation of industries, services, government, and economic activities, the continuous operation of which is essential to the nation's security. D. In performing its functions, the Board shall utilize to the maximum extent the facilities and resources of the departments and agencies of the government. Title II. The National Military Establishment. Establishment of the National Military Establishment. Section 201. A. There is hereby established the National Military Establishment, and the Secretary of Defense shall be the head thereof. B. The National Military Establishment shall consist of the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, and the Department of the Air Force, together with all other agencies created under Title II of this Act. Secretary of Defense. Section 202A. There shall be a Secretary of Defense, who shall be appointed from civilian life by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, provided that a person who has within 10 years been on active duty as a commissioned officer in a regular component of the armed services shall not be eligible for appointment as Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense shall be the principal assistant to the President in all matters relating to the national security. Under the direction of the President, and subject to the provisions of this Act, he shall perform the following duties. 1. Establish general policies and programs for the national military establishment and for all of the departments and agencies therein. 2. Exercise general direction, authority, and control over such departments and agencies. 3. Take appropriate steps to eliminate unnecessary duplication or overlapping in the fields of procurement, supply, transportation, storage, health, and research. 4. Supervise and coordinate the preparation of the budget estimates of the departments and agencies comprising the national military establishment. Formulate and determine the budget estimates for submittal to the Bureau of the Budget, and supervise the budget programs of such departments and agencies under the applicable Appropriation Act, provided that nothing herein contained shall prevent the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Navy, or the Secretary of the Air Force from presenting to the President or to the Director of the Budget, after first so informing the Secretary of Defense, any report or recommendation relating to his department which he may deem necessary, and provided further that the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, and the Department of the Air Force shall be administered as individual executive departments by their respective secretaries, and all powers and duties relating to such departments not specifically conferred upon the Secretary of Defense by this Act shall be retained by each of their respective secretaries. B. The Secretary of Defense shall submit annual written reports to the President and the Congress covering expenditures, work, and accomplishments of the national military establishment, together with such recommendations as he shall deem appropriate. C. The Secretary of Defense shall cause a seal of office to be made for the national military establishment of such design as the President shall approve, and judicial notice shall be taken thereof. Military Assistance to the Secretary. Section 203. Officers of the armed services may be detailed to duty as assistants and personal aides to the Secretary of Defense, but he shall not establish a military staff. Civilian Personnel. Section 204A. The Secretary of Defense is authorized to appoint from civilian life not to exceed 3 special assistants to advise and assist him in the performance of his duties. Each such special assistant shall receive compensation at the rate of $10,000 a year. B. The Secretary of Defense is authorized, subject to the Civil Service Laws and the Classification Act of 1923, as amended, to appoint and fix the compensation of such other civilian personnel as may be necessary for the performance of the functions of the national military establishment, other than those of the departments of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Department of the Army. Section 205A. The Department of War shall hereafter be designated the Department of the Army, and the title of the Secretary of War shall be changed to Secretary of the Army. Changes shall be made in the titles of other officers and activities of the Department of Army as the Secretary of the Army may determine. B. All laws, orders, regulations, and other actions relating to the Department of War or to any officer or activity whose title is changed under this section shall, insofar as they are not inconsistent with the provisions of this Act, be deemed to relate to the Department of the Army within the national military establishment, or to such officer or activity designated by his or its new title. C. The term Department of the Army, as used in this Act, shall be construed to mean the Department of the Army at the seat of government and all field headquarters, forces, reserve components, installations, activities, and functions under the control or supervision of the Department of the Army. D. The Secretary of the Army shall cause a seal of office to be made for the Department of the Army, of such design as the President may approve, and judicial notice shall be taken thereof. E. In general, the United States Army, within the Department of the Army, shall include land combat and service forces and such aviation and water transport as may be organic therein. It shall be organized, trained, and equipped primarily for prompt and sustained combat incident to operations on land. It shall be responsible for the preparation of land forces necessary for the effective prosecution of war, except as otherwise assigned and in accordance with integrated joint mobilization plans for the expansion of peacetime components of the Army to meet the needs of war. Department of the Navy. Section 206, A. The term Department of the Navy, as used in this Act, shall be construed to mean the Department of the Navy at the seat of government, the headquarters, United States Marine Corps, the entire operating forces of the United States Navy, including Naval Aviation, and of the United States Marine Corps, including the reserve components of such forces, all field activities, headquarters, forces, bases, installations, activities, and functions under the control or supervision of the Department of the Navy, and the United States Coast Guard when operating as a part of the Navy pursuant to law. B. In general, the United States Navy, within the Department of the Navy, shall include naval combat and services forces and such aviation as may be organic therein. It shall be organized, trained, and equipped primarily for prompt and sustained combat incident to operations at sea. It shall be responsible for the preparation of naval forces necessary for the effective prosecution of war, except as otherwise assigned, and in accordance with integrated joint mobilization plans for the expansion of the peacetime components of the Navy to meet the needs of war. All naval aviation shall be integrated with the naval service as part thereof within the Department of the Navy. Naval aviation shall consist of combat and service and training forces, and shall include land-based naval aviation, air transport essential for naval operations, all air weapons and air techniques involved in the operations and activities of the United States Navy, and the entire remainder of the aeronautical organization of the United States Navy, together with the personnel necessary therefor. The Navy shall be generally responsible for naval reconnaissance, anti-submarine warfare, and protection of shipping. Effective date. Section 310, A. The first sentence of Section 202A and Sections 1, 2, 307, 308, 309, and 310 shall take effect immediately upon the enactment of this Act. B. Except as provided in subsection A, the provisions of this Act shall take effect on whichever of the following days is the earlier: the day after the day upon which the Secretary of Defense first appointed takes office, or the 60th day after the date of the enactment of this Act. Succession to the Presidency. Section 311, Paragraph 1 of subsection D of Section 1 of the Act entitled An Act to Provide for the Performance of the Duties of the Office of President in case of the removal, resignation, death, or inability both of the President and Vice President, approved July 18, 1947, is amended by striking out Secretary of War and inserting in lieu thereof Secretary of Defense, and by striking out Secretary of the Navy. Signed, Joseph W. Martin, Jr., Speaker of the House of Representatives. Arthur H. Vandenberg, President of the Senate pro tempore. Approved July 26, 1947. Harry S. Truman.